Hi, I want to talk with you a little bit about Daisy Miller, in particular about how to move our response to the text from a character focused response to a more broadly culturally focused response. Now, I will tell you that the desire to read this story as a morality play is a very enticing one. That is how it was read when it was published. Americans fiercely debated Daisy's moral character. What kind of girl or woman was she? And Winterbourne and Mrs. Miller were not immune from moral judgment as well. What was Winterbourne responsible for this tragedy and his failure to see who Daisy truly was? Is Daisy a victim of society or an agent of her own suffering? What about Mrs. Miller? Is she the failed parent? Is this on her for not properly supervising her child? These kind of discussions come up all the time when people respond to this text, and they're fun, and there's nothing wrong with them per se. But I think it's important to recognize them as a first superficial level. And the challenge is to move beyond there and move to the kind of level that those of us who've read about James, like you have from reading the introduction, should be thinking about. Because one of the points your introduction makes that I think is really valuable is that James was a social critic and that he was trying to complicate literature and literature's response to culture. So simple black and white morality play judgments rarely worked. In fact, he worked hard to make it so that his fiction didn't conform to those kind of expectations. This is where the discussion of his emphasis on ambiguity, on psychological realism, the complexity of the human mind and the way it works and how it interacts with the world around it and is shaped by that. The, in general, complexity on the cultural and individual level of the human experience that doesn't lend itself to simple black and white sorting out of problems or crises or tragedies. So with this in mind, with this idea that we want to move beyond the question of the morality of the characters to broader cultural dynamics, I've got two suggestions. The first is beware Winterbourne. Winterbourne is one of the main reasons readers get caught up in this question of what kind of girl is Daisy? Is she a woman of ill repute, or has she acted morally inappropriately? And that's because he projects those questions onto her, which is of course ironic because there are various suggestions of his own inappropriate behavior with a woman back in Geneva. In other words, we shouldn't trust Winterbourne, and we shouldn't let Winterbourne frame the experience for us. In fact, we should be on alert to the limitations and problematics of Winterbourne's perspective, which isn't to say Winterbourne should be dismissed as the guy to blame or corrupt or evil. Just like Daisy, just like Mrs. Miller, just like all the characters, he is functioning in very complex cultural dynamics that shape him, that shape his vision of the world, and that the text is profoundly involved in criticizing, questioning, challenging, complicating. And then the other piece of advice that will help you move beyond the simple character level of the text and think bigger, think the way James probably was thinking, given the body of his work and writing, is to think big. Think big. Let's think about questions of human agency and determinism. How does this text philosophically explore how much control we have over our own lives, or how much of it is shaped by external forces like our biology, our family, our culture, social forces, social and political events? The question of epistemological uncertainty. How do we justify judgment? How do we justify opinion? Especially in a rapidly changing world where traditional modes of understanding, stereotypes, cultural boxes, and labels are fragmenting. What is James saying about class and how it operates in the text? What's being said here about gender, femininity, and masculinity in this narrative? How are men and women constrained and or mobilized by the expectations for their behaviors within given cultural contexts? And finally, materialism. The text is very interested in the material and the relationship between the material and the self and the spiritual and the idealistic and the individual and the community. And frankly suspicious of materialism, especially when it's linked to American capitalism and its role as consumer of European culture and European art in the 1870s. So there's a lot of big questions to think about as you engage with this text. And if you get too caught up in the morality play of the main characters and that initial obvious response, you'll miss some of the beauty, the staggering beauty and complexity and richness of this text. Okay, I hope this quick mini lecture gets you thinking in some creative ways. See you in Blackboard, and see you next week, by the way, in our online synchronous meeting. Thanks.